Hi everyone, I'm Alon Litz. I'm the CEO of October Health. Really excited to have Lesley Anne Gatter here with me today. She's the Global Head of People and Organization at Investec Bank. Really excited. Investec was actually where I started my career, and I've known Lesley for quite a while, so really excited to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me here. We remember your time at Investec well.
Yeah, it was a great time, really special place, and really excited to unpack that and give the audience a feel for what makes Investec special. But maybe before we get into that, do you want to just give everyone a bit of insight into your background?
Sure. So I started my career in a place very different from Investec. And in fact, when I landed at Investec, I had to build a glossary of terms for myself just to understand the basics of banking and wealth management, like what is credit, as opposed to just a card that I used to swipe. So it was a very foreign environment to me. I studied psychology and spent a lot of time working with trauma and in the context of a changing and transitional South Africa. And I guess that's poignant today as well. And so I worked a long time in places like the Center for the Study of Violence and other environments similar to that, and wrote my master's thesis on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and its capacity for healing, for psychological healing. So it was a very, very foreign world.
A very different world.
Yeah, very different world. But in fact, it was people-centric and oriented around how we help individuals grow and thrive and change, and it was focused on looking at systemic environments. And actually, the business world is not a far cry from that. And the role I get to play in Investec now, looking after our people and our systemic organizational constructs aligns in many ways. So it was a very lucky chance meeting with Stephen Kossoff, the CEO at the time, that afforded me a role inside Investec. And I started off looking after learning at Investec and the full ambit of learning, from leadership development and our diversity awareness initiatives, as they were called then, to so-called hard skills, like the technical skills required for banking and wealth management, and then to some of the personal and individual growth areas, which was exciting. And then eventually, long time, I've been invested for a long time, got to this role. So it's been an exciting journey, and I always say I would rather do something else at Investec than this somewhere else, just given the nature of the organization.
Yeah, I mean, it's a special place. I think you feel it when you walk into the bank, and just the energy and the excitement, and I think the relationship that individuals have with each other. And maybe if we just take a step back to unpack that, I mean, you've joined, as you say, a long time ago. How big was the organization back then? I mean, you've been part of that growth.
Yes. So I have been part of the growth. I've been an investor for 18 years, actually. So it's a good number and a long time. And interestingly, the headcount has, jumped up and down over that time. It hasn't just been a growth story, primarily because we have obviously...
Geographically.
Yeah. So geographically, we've changed our footprint up and down over the time I've been there, from closing down something like Australia and other jurisdictions. We also demerged from asset management, from Investec Asset Management, which is now 91 in 2020. So that was a number of people that declined. Last year, we did a very big transaction combination with Rathbones in the UK, and that took out about nearly 2,000 people.
Sure.
So the numbers have kind of meandered between 8,000 and 10,000, up and down, back again. But I think where your question is going is, as you scale, how do you retain that special essence of who you once were?
Exactly.
And I think people or organizations get lost in that the idea of scale implies that you can't do things as you used to. That when we were small, we could be very personal, very agile, very, very loose, even in the way, because we can make decisions based on your individuality. And that as you scale, you need uniformity, because the organization requires policy, it requires protocol, so that it's fair. And then the fairness creates this idea, they will be very objective and no one will be able to complain about it. But I think that whole thing is like fallacious. It's a fallacy of how organizations run. So Investec's done something very different in that.
Yeah, so I'd love to unpack that. I think you hit the nail on the head in that. I think Investec's unique, and obviously we'll chat about the founder transition, which I'm sure was difficult to navigate. But there is something unique about the culture, and I think that goes back to the founders of the organization who are entrepreneurs, and they've managed to scale that entrepreneurial spirit when they've gone from, a couple of people in a room to an 8,000 person plus organization. So I think like that entrepreneurial spirit's a big aspect. The family, it feels like a family. Everyone really cares for each other, has also remained consistent.
So I think the first thing, there's like a theoretical premise and then there's the actual practice of it. So I think theoretically, I would offer that two things. That firstly, no one leads an organization of 8,000 people or 15,000 people or 30,000 people. Of course, the CEO is responsible and accountable ultimately for all the people, but directly nobody leads like that. The ideal number for us is not more than 15 people in a team, but really much closer to 8 to 10. And so every team leader is responsible for 8 to 10 people. And the ambit of thinking like that helps you understand that, yes, the number of leaders increase as you scale and grow and you need more people, but you're also able to contain the way in which they interact. While we obviously have fair practice and we're very concerned with parity and appropriateness, we have chosen to see individuals in our context. And we really try work very hard to say that the intersubjectivity rather than the objectivity is what creates people feeling seen, people feeling like they're included, and that they have a sense of belonging in the organization. So the primary thing then around the point that you raised so well, Alon, around entrepreneurial spirit and entrepreneurialism is that the entrepreneur, and I mean you like in the midst of that, is it feels ownership, a deep weighted sense of ownership, and that ownership keeps you up at night and it keeps you thinking in the shower about your business and on the way to work, and you're constantly thinking about what's right, what's wrong, what we can fix, but it is the fact that you own it and that you are almost solely responsible for it that is weighty. And we've tried to create an environment that continually reinforces ownership in our environment, that irrespective of who you are, there is not a point at which you gain ownership. We are all owners of this business. So we want people to drive into Investec and say, that pillar belongs to me, or that brick's mine, or that big piece of marble, that a granite that encases our buildings is ours, is mine. And I identify with it. And so when I come to work, I don't think about when I can get home, although we all spend a little bit of time doing that, or when, how much leave I can eke out of this organization. Rather, I think about what can I contribute to make the thing that I do here whole and better, the team that I lead, the individuals that I interact with. And it really changes a different narrative. And there are lots of practices that we do to encourage that. One of the things that Investec's always done and has continued to do irrespective of our size is that every individual has shares in the organization. There is no one without material ownership inside Investec.
It's amazing.
It is an amazing thing, and everyone gets a dividend twice a year. All parts of the organization are paid a dividend. So you are directly profit sharing beyond just EVA into or bonuses.
It's not just something that you say.
Yes, it's not something that we say, and we don't ask it of people. We deliver on it, and there are various other practices and processes. And while, of course, organizations ebb and flow, sometimes there are teams and pockets that don't practice it in quite the way you want, and you need to enroll people differently, and we can talk about that. The reality is that we really drive this idea that ownership is what entrepreneurialism is about, and we want people to have a sense that they run their own little shop inside this big corporate, and they don't work for Investec, they work with Investec in a partnership, which is why we have such a culture of care and concern for our people. And the two things I would say about that is that obviously within boundaries and what's appropriate, we really see people in their individuality, that your issue with your child is very particular to you, even if people see that many times over. Your loss and bereavement, the illness and discomfort that appears in your life is something that we want to connect with, rather than try and just understand how we can engage your professional self. And we talk deeply about bringing your whole self to work. Bring all of yourself here. Don't swipe and leave something at the door, because anyway you don't, and it's not how human beings function. Come in with everything, share it with us, and we will create a reciprocity in the organization, something reciprocal, and we will give so much to you as an organization, and in turn we expect a fortune back. It is not this like, altruistic, like NGO environment. It demands performance, but that's the reciprocity. So it's a very careful balance of these things. And the last thing I would just say is that we're a bank. We started off as a leasing company, but we've been a bank for a very long time, and a wealth manager. We have, I want to say hundreds, but tens of regulators, and we have exceptional relationships and respect for the regulator. So it's not an anything goes environment. It is not wild and loose. It is carefully curated, highly regulated, and behaves in accordance with that integrity always. So you're managing many things all the time in the context of an environment like this.
So it's complicated.
It's complicated, yeah.
But I think it's a balance that you're getting right, obviously. But there's a lot to unpack there. I think maybe going back to where you started, where you spoke to your L&D background.
Yes.
And you spoke to managers being critical to the ability to scale culture. Obviously, some of the challenge with managers is, in some cases, you have like strong individual contributors that are great at what they do. And because they're great at what they do, they rise within the organization and they become managers. And in some cases that works, in some cases that doesn't. But what do you do as an organization to really empower future leaders, to ensure that they are ready to take on that managerial role? Because the skill set that made them a success as a contributor, individual contributor, is not necessarily what's going to make them a success as a leader.
So we've often fallen into the trap, which many organizations do, and I think what you're pointing to is that we take a great technical specialist, somebody who's a phenomenal trader or a brilliant coder and software engineer, and then because they're so strong technically, you imagine that they could lead. But actually what they are often is a thought leader, or they're a great technician, and their expanse could grow like that. So I think the first thing is to really engage individuals, which we do spend time on, around their development and their trajectories. We don't have career paths inside Investec. We don't have competency frameworks. There are no ladders to climb. In fact, we think development is circular, much rather, because we have a limited hierarchy, much rather than we do that you should do the following courses, achieve the following goals, and suddenly you'll be, a senior something, vice somebody. That's not our style at all. But it's important to engage individuals, and through honest and open feedback, which is one of our cornerstone practices in the organization, people understand their strengths and where they're at. And that's not to say we haven't fallen into the trap many times of putting the wrong leader in a role. But the reality is people who are in that situation suffer as much as the team suffers. It's not often that they're under any illusion that like it's going beautifully and the team is only suffering. And the team give feedback because our environment is so empowered. The team will challenge before anyone else even notices. The noise and the pushback will be exceptional. So the two things where we are, so aside from the development conversation and the very real owning because it's great to be a specialist in the environment as well. You become expert and thought leader, and you can really develop a deep expertise that gives you as much status in many instances and as much access in our environment than just being a manager or a leader. But maybe that is your trajectory and your aspiration. And then there's two specific pieces. One is conceptual and a construct that we've built in the organization, which is that your title gives you no access whatsoever. And we got feedback from an individual who joined us from one of the other big banks a little while ago, who said he struggled in one of his first first weeks in the organization to understand in the many meetings he was in who was the leader. He couldn't work out who was the leader in the meeting. He had go onto our system and see the roles, and so because we try to create such a flat structure and such an egalitarian environment that actually it's expertise that rises, its opinion and knowledge, its capability that actually leads in any one situation. And so it's why we don't like titles. Most people who take on leadership roles or managerial roles, as you said, are called team leader. No one is a senior anything or we try and get away from that so that it's not your status and the fact that you've been appointed to something that empowers you, but rather it's your currency as in your capability and your access to the culture. The second thing we do more than almost anything else is we run culture process for the whole organization continuously. So everyone knows the ask. And then we run a fortune of leadership development, and you don't have to be a leader to enter into the leadership development programs. As soon as we see there's potential, there's an inkling, we begin inside the leadership journey. And our leadership journey is premised on the idea of being always on. That you don't, it's not like studying accounting. Like you do accounting 1 and accounting 2, like you'll know, and then you've done stats or actuary, and you don't have to do 1 again when you've done 3, because you've articulated and you've got it. Instead, here we believe that that leadership learning is something you always need to be busy with. So you should always be in some form of coaching, some form of, and as you enter into different parts of your role, so you want to access content again, because now you look at it through different eyes with different responsibility. So we spend a fortune of our time, finances and resources, building leadership capability continuously.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, there are a lot of points there again. I think, it is important that people know that they don't have to become a manager to, grow within the organization, and different people want different things and still benefit from the same programs. I just want to call out your point on flat structure and titles. I remember a story that Stephen told once when I was at the bank, and it just always stuck with me. He mentioned he was at the World Economic Forum, and with a bunch of CEOs in the room, and no one was really giving him much time because he didn't have a card with his title on it. It was just his name, which at that point no one at Investec had titles on their cards. And he said the challenge to him, right, and the challenge to everyone in the organization is that people mustn't measure you based on your title. They must measure you based on the substance of what you say and the value that you can bring. And it was just such a good example. And he said he spoke, and then all of a sudden people gave him the time of day.
Yes.
But before they otherwise you just, you do judge people based on their title, and that's often misleading, which is just not the case at Investec, which is really unique.
But I would also hope that the world that we live in, given the context of where we are, seeks to be a better place that is not driven by hierarchy and is not driven by a nobility that exists inside organizations or any other structures, but really comes to understand that contribution is everything, and that each person, according to their contribution, should be valued and respected and given a voice. And so to Stephen's point, though, it's hard in some environments. Like we've had lots of events in spaces like corporate finance, where if you arrive at a client, especially big institutions, and you'll know this well, to say who are you? I'm a team leader, or I'm a consultant, but I've got 20 years experience and I've closed these. But unless it often doesn't open any doors for you, and because clients or institutions want to meet with the vice president or the president or the senior something. So when you try and buck the system, you do place, it does become controversial. You do place your people sometimes at a disadvantage. If Stephen hadn't opened his mouth in Davos that year, he might have got dismissed, in terms of not being anybody, whereas his contribution would be valuable. So it takes a special effort to be committed to it and keep going with it.
But I think so much about the culture is that you've got practices in place which reinforce the outcome.
Yeah.
So it's no one has an office, right? It's an open plan environment, which is also unique.
Yeah.
And I think that just reinforces the flat structure, that no one is kind of better off than anyone else. You're all sitting in the same office space, and everyone has access to everyone, right? No one's behind closed doors.
And I think the thing you point to is an important thing for us to talk about in the context of a cultural conversation, which is artifacts. Every culture must have artifacts, and it comes out of religious, thinking about religious environments, and it's easy for people to relate to it if you talk about that. So in a church, you'll have certain demarcators, they're artifacts to know where we are. If there's a ritual, a basin or bath, we know we're at a baptism. When a crucifix is on the wall, we know we've walked into a church. Or some religious environment. Same for temples, same for mosques, synagogues, etc. They're demarcators, and then the practices and rituals inside them, like a baby being born and its naming, a wedding, when somebody dies. We know how to do these things inside those environments because there's a practice and they are accompanied by artifacts. So artifacts can be singing, praying, etc., clothing, etc. Organizations do exactly the same thing in terms of culture. So at Investec, the flat structure is the premise. The open plan offices are the artifact. We can't say we're a flat structure. If we say, and then as you climb the organization's hierarchy, so you get an office, well, then you're not a flat structure. So inside Investec, there's, I think, 2, maybe 3 kinds of desks, like actual physical desks you can get. It's not special for who you are. We all sit in the same way. We all have, same chairs, same computers, same phones. It's all the same. It's all the same because those are the artifacts that instruct your culture. And as you scale the organization, if you maintain your artifacts and you are very, very deliberate and overt with them, your organization is able to hold its culture because it is that ritual and practice that remains in place all the time. And you need to be consistent with it.
I think that consistency is key, and it goes back to your point around fairness and creating as much as you can the sense of objectivity in how things are done. I think another piece is maybe the approach. I know COVID, a lot of organizations obviously went, fully remote, but part of what I think makes Investec culture special is that office environment. So would love to hear a bit about how you navigated that, because I know now if you go back to the Investec office, it's bustling, right? It's definitely not an office where people are working remotely. Yeah. So how did you navigate that? How did you get people back in the office? Because that is unusual. And I think it's part of what makes the organization special.
So, yeah, that's true. Look, if you are trained as people like me are, the COVID, if you could create some psychological distance, and obviously aside from the tragic loss of life and finance and resources, it was a very interesting time to navigate an organization. And so it's something that I will always be grateful for, the opportunity to have led a people function and an organization function in the context of that. So the culture is everything. The culture had prepared us for COVID, even though we didn't know that's what we were doing. The culture had long been focused on output as opposed to hours, office hours. It had long been prized on contribution, aligned to the entrepreneurial spirit, and it had always spoken about flexibility, that it sought deep flexibility for people given their output, and that I remember very early on in my time at Investec, I had gone to my daughter's little ballet Stedford. She was 3 or 4 and she was doing, it was like some random Thursday afternoon, and she was dancing. And one of the first times in my life, Stephen Cossa phoned me. I saw his name on my cell phone. I was like, of all times to phone me, I'm not near the office, I'm at ballet. So I took the call quickly and he said, can you come to my desk? So I said, I can, but it's going to take me 20 minutes. I have to leave where I am. I'm at a little ballet concert, but I'll be there in 20 minutes. And he said, are you crazy? He said, you're at a much more important thing. See me when you're back or when you can. Yeah. And he said, and go back now. So, but he set the example, and I know it's not always only about Stephen. There's so many stories, and our current leadership is just so interesting in terms of the culture. Yeah. But it was exactly that thing. So we always so we knew flexibility and we knew contribution very well. So it prepared us, our culture prepared us very well.
It's high trust, right?
High trust, high discipline, high stretch, and lots of support in the environment. So if you trust your people and you're trading on their capability and the relationship you have with them, you're able to do quite a lot with it. That said, though, I think there's a lot of noise, maybe inside Investec, but mostly I've heard outside around how you can't build culture in a hybrid environment and you can't build culture in a remote environment. I don't think that's actually true. I think that's kind of naive. I think you can build culture wherever. You just have to be deliberate about it. When you're totally remote, you have to say, these are artifacts now. These are remote artifacts. Everyone has a screen behind them that says the name of the organization. Everybody engages. So you can create culture. It was our deliberate choice, and we really were deliberate and considered around it, to say we choose not to create culture and craft culture remotely. That is not how we want to be. It's not that we couldn't have or that other companies can't. I think they can. we chose to say the nature of this relational environment that we want like this very 3D, very confrontational and caring interaction. And we wanted to do that in our offices, face to face. It wasn't so easy to get staff back. It took time, and also the pandemic limped on, and then there was like a retreat. But as soon as we could get people back into the office, we built it on trust to say, even to this day, we've never said we're a 5-day-a-week organization, but we have said we work in office. And if you work in, which we're hoping is 5 days a week in most cases, you have great flexibility always, enormous compassion inside the organization, but we expect you in our offices and in our spaces. And in some spaces it's hurt us a little bit, but largely it's just been exceptional, and it's since 2022. It's not a recent thing.
And it feels like it's not something you've had to force people to do. It's something that people have wanted to do just because they get so much from being in the office.
Hopefully.
But maybe I think a point that you touched on was leadership. I know it's Investec's 50-year celebration this year, so congrats on that. But part of what's happened in the organization is this leadership transition away from, founders to new leadership. And that's something which organizations often don't get right, but it feels like things are going really well at Investec when it comes to that transition. So what do you think it is that you've done as an organization to set the organization up for success?
So I would say transitions are hard. It's been really interesting. And I would say, I'm sure our leaders would say complex. It has required lots of thinking and planning and consideration through the time. It was big for us. Our founders exited the organization after 45 years as founder leaders. And so the organization,
big personalities as
huge
well.
Charismatic leaders who embodied the culture and embodied the organization in many ways. And so as they walked, they sprinkled the culture dust and so it was a lot to replace. I think one of the things that was artful, and it was a transition at the edge. It wasn't like they'd been there for 20 years and it was a natural handover. It was complicated, and it happened in the time of COVID, which I would say to our group CEO Fani's credit. What a thing to navigate in taking over a founder-led organization through a demerge with our asset management business into an unheard of 1 in 100-year global pandemic. It's just a lot to cope with, and the success that he's achieved for the organization. But one of the things I would say is that our founders chose people who knew the organization well. We didn't go externally to go and source a CEO that would bring brand new. Fani had been our chairman for 10 years, and he understood the organization in an extremely intimate way. He had also been a client, so he had been two of many stakeholders, but two of our major stakeholder relationships he had occupied, and he understood us well. And on top of that, he appreciated the organization deeply. He also saw the scars and some of the dark, hairy issues that we had either not touched sufficiently, and they chose a brave leader in Fani and in Richard and Ruth and others who are the local CEOs who had also known the organization. I mean, Richard Wainwright well. He had led our corporate and institutional business for many, many years, and then took up the bank in South Africa leadership. So these are people who we'd built over many years and known and had built us as well. And so I think being able to take leadership from pipeline, it's always good to bring in external people, lots of new thinking and fresh ideas. But if you want a transition that feels familiar to the organization, the appreciation of who you are and what's sacred about you helps. So I think Fani, Richard, and others really transitioned Investec from a founder-led organization to a culture-led organization. And on top of that, articulated many things that we'd known about ourselves but never said, like our purpose. We'd never had an overt purpose statement, but they led the creation and articulation of a purpose statement that really helped have a North Star for the organization. And it was very familiar to us. It wasn't like something that came from left field and we're like, now who are we? It was like, oh yeah, we've always been there. It was kind of like, I always said,
put words to it, really.
Yes, it was like how Michelangelo described carving David. He said David had always been in the rock, and then he just chipped away. That was how like our purpose was articulated for us. It was something we knew, and then it just had language to it. So there were, again, additional artifacts created to remind us of who we were and their commitment to who we were. We didn't have big sessions about massive change in terms of who we are, the fabric of our organization, and the way in which we transact. What we did have is a very overt strategy, direction, and again, like a capital markets day, which was something we hadn't done before. So from a strategic point of view and those kind of imperative objectives, that was a change for the organization. And it's resulted in, a very focused articulation of our growth and direction. The culture was a commitment that they made early on, and they've lived through it all the time.
So it's really just the maturing of the organization into its next phase, right?
Yes.
But the essence remains the same.
Yeah.
Maybe, and I know we're close on time and there's so much to discuss and unpack, but I think something that's unique, and you touched on it with, someone like Richard, who's been in the organization for so long, yourself and many, many others, is just the tenor of employees and Investec. And I think you've got a lot of boomerangs as well, where people leave and then they land up back at the bank because they just can't find that same special thing elsewhere. And you've touched on some of these points, but I think in today's day and age, it's not like usual that people spend 10 plus years at an organization, and there are probably multiple examples like that at Investec. And what is that has created that secret sauce that's kept people in the organization for so long?
People say that it makes you so crazy, the place, because it's got such a particular madness to it that you actually aren't employable anywhere else. You either just have to be in your own business or come back if you choose to leave. You mentioned the 50th, which has been such a reflective space for us to take up. We've really spent a lot of time reflecting, not just congratulating the arrival at 50, but being very reflective about who we are and who we are now. And in doing that, we looked at our staff lists and looked at the tenure of employees. So the reality is we lose people. We like churn in the organization. Churn is good for an organization. It creates revitalization and infusion of new ideas, brings different challenge to you. So there is a very big demarcation of people out there who maybe will watch this and say, like, it was not like that, I didn't like it. And we, just as our client proposition has been, we're not everything to everyone. So as an employer, we're not everything to everyone, and it doesn't work out for everyone. It is a very specific place. As we've said, it's got a very pointed, very overt culture. If it doesn't work for you, it's hard to be there. And we recognize it. We try to ease the journey in for people, but we do lose people around the 2-year mark, around the 5-year mark. But it generally seems that, like, once you stay past 7 years, you stay. And so we have exceptionally long tenure. Sometimes you can sit in a room and say, I've only been here. People say, I've only been here for 12 years. It's a long time, but we do have it, we do. So the organization is obviously aging as well, and so people are aging, and we've got lots of transition. We've got more retirement than we've ever had before. And more mobility, interestingly, than we've ever had before. So more people moving between divisions and between geographies. Ruth Lees, our CEO in the UK, started her journey off in South Africa. She worked in both our support and frontline areas in the UK, and now is a very important and interesting CEO for us. I think what keeps people is that the place is energizing and stimulating. And I would say that in my very long journey here now, almost no 2 years have been the same. There's often a different challenge. The organization is, because it's so entrepreneurial, is continually thinking about different ways to do things and new things. Because it's such a high performance culture and demands so much of you, there's very little time to be in a comfort zone. As soon as you think, like, I've got it, something happens to say you actually don't, or you need to improve on it. And then there's a high level of reciprocity. Investec has allowed me to mother as I want to learn as I've needed to, and put me under just enough pressure to be sufficiently angst and sufficiently motivated.
This is a level of healthy stress.
It is. Yeah. It is a level of healthy stress. So I think if you can mix things up for people all the time, Kieran Whelan also, one of our execs spoke the other day at a function we had on the 50th, and I said to him, Kieran, you've been here for 37 years. And you've been everywhere. He's been in all our geographies and many of our divisions. And he said, his kids had said to him, nobody stays in a job, like you're saying, for 37 years. Who stays in a job for 37 years? And he said, I've had 12 and maybe more jobs in those years. And each time it's a different job.
Yeah.
In a slightly changed organization. And the challenge is as if I'm starting anew. So we create interesting assignments. We continually try mix it up.
You push
for people
yeah.
and to push them. And I think that reciprocity drives a lot of why people stay. And then it's very kind. It's not hard. It's not easy. It's not difficult to be kind to your employees. It's not difficult to be generous.
It's not, but a lot of organizations don't get
Yeah.
that right. But I think that is something that Investec do. Just the last question.
Sure.
You mentioned, Ruth, the UK business. Obviously, you're dealing with a global organization, and it's one thing to get it right across multiple offices in South Africa, but you've got the commonality of the majority of employees are South African, but that's not the case with a business in the UK and a large business. So how do you build that unified culture in a global organization like Investec?
So I think often, obviously, environments play. So there's like something which probably is also not true. There's like South African. People say like South Africans do this because South Africa is not homogenous. It's so diversified. And then there's UK culture, but there's not a UK culture, but there is nuance, obviously. So you need to be sufficiently agile to adjust who you are to the environment that you find yourselves in. Our two anchored geographies, our big geographies, are South Africa and the UK, and then we do have operations in India. And each of these, Switzerland, etc., but each of these places are slightly nuanced, somewhat different from each other. So you have to be cognizant and extremely respectful of your local realities and the diversity that they require to consider inclusion and belonging for your people inside there. But your organizational culture is your organizational culture. And as long as it is not disrespectful to the environments that you find yourself in, which shouldn't ever happen, you need to stick to your guns on who we are. Sometimes some of those things will be more difficult for a certain environment. Sometimes they won't. And then you have to be very deliberate about how you work with them. But those artifacts we discussed, those rituals and customs that we said at the beginning, which is what creates and holds culture, you have to replicate that in your geographies in order to say, this is who we are. Let us inculcate you. And it doesn't mean you aren't who you are outside the religions you belong to, the kind of ethnicity that you have. Of course, it's entirely respected inside and outside the organization. But in here, we do a specific thing and we work to inculcate it in a compassionate way, but continuously. And if you dilute that all the time and pivot entirely, you don't have that culture. You have something else. Might be good, might not be, but it's not the thing you intended it to be.
So you've got to be deliberate.
Correct.
But awesome. The time flew by and I think made me quite nostalgic. So thanks so much. Thanks to everyone for joining. Really, I think in summary, a masterclass on culture, how to scale it, how to build it, and how to keep it consistent. So thanks so much for joining us, and hopefully everyone enjoyed.